250,000 birds take flight here at Sand Lake Refuge every day. They stop off here on their way south for the winter and again on their return journey. Seemingly chaotic, these flocks are controlled by the Fish and Wildlife Service preserving the habitat, by the birds' own instincts, and by the weather. This is a prime example of nature's own air traffic control. Sand Lake Refuge in South Dakota was established in 1935 to provide a stopping-off point for migrating wildfowl. Aided by the restoration of breeding grounds on the Canadian prairies, the North American duck population was increasing. It needed a chain of refuges along its migration routes. Sand Lake on the Central Flyway was one of the most important. Though it was created mainly for 250,000 ducks, snow geese in great numbers also began arriving there. In late September, the lesser snow geese start moving south from their breeding grounds in the tundra around Hudson Bay. One of the first ports of call on the journey is Sand Lake. Though its key role is as a staging point, Sand Lake is also an important breeding area. Over 100 species nest there, including western grebes, which perform their spectacular courtship displays. These water-walking demonstrations often end in one partner offering the other a fish. Breeding American white pelicans mingle with the grebes. The male is distinguished by the horny growth on its bill. Large colonies of double-crested cormorants stop off here too. The diversity of breeding birds is not accidental. The populations have been aided by careful management. Islands were created for pelicans and cormorants by building dams to control the water levels over 5,000 hectares of marshland. Tundra swans nest far to the north, but the giant Canada geese are one of Sand Lake's great breeding successes. This race of Canada goose was close to extinction until a rearing program at the refuge enabled it to be released in the wild over much of its former range in North and South Dakota. Giant Canada geese now breed freely in the wild as well as on the refuge. There are waders here too, the American avocet and the killdeer, a relative of the ringed plover in Britain. These birds and their nesting activities are typical of Sand Lake in spring. The skeins of incoming snow geese contain both white and blue-coloured birds. They're actually the same species and are both colour variations of the lesser snow goose. The journey from the breeding colonies along the shores of Hudson Bay is over 1,600 kilometers, which takes the birds approximately 20 hours. Before Sand Lake and the other refuges along the Central Flyway were created, the geese often flew straight through to the Mississippi Delta, over 3,000 kilometers south, where they would spend the winter. But the carefully managed reception that awaits them at Sand Lake is so attractive that most of them no longer make the migration non-stop. And so, in the early autumn, the first of the birds arrive. These young snow geese were hatched this year in the Arctic. The proposed landing field down below them has been specially designed to lure them in. It consists of sweet corn. 730 hectares of the refuge are planted with crops to provide feed for these huge concentrations of migrating wildfowl. Ducks and geese between them can amount to over 500,000 birds. Also reaping the benefits of the cropping scheme is the occasional pheasant. Government and local farmers provide all this free bird food on a sharecropping basis. The government usually leaves their half of the grain and maize unharvested. It's this that attracts and detains the geese on the refuge. Management of this concentrated air traffic is an ongoing process. Stubble and grass must be cut to give the geese the best possible grazing. The flocks take wing whenever they are disturbed at their feeding grounds. The airborne birds fly in to join an equal number of geese already landed on the lake. Some of the grain is harvested by the refuge management to be scattered as supplementary feed when growing crops have been eaten. But this particular load is being distributed for a very special purpose. A runway paved with corn is put down to lure the geese to one specific part of the refuge. Close by is a well-hidden battery of rockets. During their flights, the geese don't see the potential danger, but they do notice the food. The rich carpet of grain is too much of a temptation, and the birds begin their descent. Once they've landed, the flocks are wary to begin with, alertly watching their surroundings before they settle to feed. Numbers of mallard have been attracted too. Despite their apparent greed, wild geese and ducks are cautious creatures. The flocks continue to be alert even while they are feeding. Already, the more nervous birds have sensed danger. The rockets that carry the nets have trapped enough for ringing purposes. This dramatic event is necessary to mark a sample of the population so that its future progress up and down the flyway can be recorded and studied. Once under the net, the geese soon calm down. The net is light and wild geese are resilient birds. The capture does them no harm. Numbered leg rings are put on and details recorded. Leg rings are less intrusive to the geese and are favoured over neck bands. However, the neck band does have an advantage over the smaller leg ring. Its number can be seen by binoculars without having to recapture the bird to verify its identity. When released, the geese fly or even walk away almost as if nothing had happened. Far more hazardous times still lie ahead of them. As autumn turns into winter at Sand Lake Refuge, the snow and blue geese become more restless. On the rich feeding provided for them on the refuge, the young birds have grown strong on the wing. Their flight muscles are now in good condition for the long journey still ahead of them. As the crops specially grown on the refuge run out, the geese have to range further afield to find food. At the period of the full moon, they do much of their feeding after dark. At sunset, the flocks move out to the feeding grounds. And then, suddenly, winter sweeps down across the prairies to Sand Lake. For the geese, it's now a question of finding food wherever they can. These are the maize fields where a few short weeks ago they gorged on the plentiful ripe grains of corn. Now there's little remaining. But still they continue to converge here, attracted as always by the flocks already on the ground. These young geese have found a patch where the taller grass has partly insulated the ground against the frost. So there's a chance of finding something edible that's not frozen solid. Their reward? Some leftover heads of corn, which will provide them with valuable sustenance at this time of year. Geese usually feed on short grasses. Beneath the snow, they know there is grazing if they can reach it. Geese not only need food, but secure resting places too. They like to roost on large open sheets of water where no predator can surprise them. The bitter winter that takes hold in the centre of the huge landmass of North America is denying them much of that roost. The lake is freezing over. Soon they will be forced to head further south. A herd of tundra swans has found a small piece of water. They will shortly head southwards too. The winter sun has temporarily melted an area of the surface ice on the lake, but shortly after sunset it will have frozen over once again. Towards the end of December, departure is imminent. Sand Lake has nothing more to offer 350,000 geese, whose final wintering ground still lies over 4,000 kilometers to the south, along the Louisiana coast. This time, the snow geese don't swing round to circle the refuge as they usually do on takeoff. Instead, they head resolutely southwards. The snow geese will return in the spring on the flight to their Arctic breeding grounds. Then, once again, the Sand Lake Refuge will be ready to welcome them and give them sanctuary as a stopover on their journey northwards.
Tomorrow morning at 10, it's Flight to Freedom closer to home as we look at the effects of pollution on the bird life of the Shetland Islands.